So considering I spend a lot of time talking about superheroes, villains, fantasy, sci-fi, whatever, you might be surprised to hear that one of my favorite series that just recently wrapped up is actually a little series by Boom Studios called Giant Days, written by John Allison. For those not aware, the 8 times Eisner nominated and 2 times winning series actually has a fairly long backstory. Giant Days is a sequel series to Allison's previous webcomic, Bobbins, which ran from 1998 to 2002, and Scary Go Round that went from 2002 to 2009. After Scary Go Round wrapped up though, he followed that up with a new webcomic called Bad Machinery, which had a much younger demographic than his previous series. So to compensate for that shift and to try to avoid alienating his audience, Allison had created 3 Giant Days stories in between chapters of Bad Machinery. Well, Allison apparently loved the idea of Giant Days so much, they decided to pitch it as a 6-issue miniseries to Boombox, a department in Boom Studios that printed experimental comics from artists outside the industry. Not only did it get approved, but Allison also got Disney animator Lisa Treyman, God I hope I'm saying that right, to do the penciling, giving the book its unique form of expression. After 6 issues, the series got picked up and recently wrapped up with issue 54. Did you need to know all that to get to the point in today's editorial? No, but I thought it was interesting, so now you know. And also, I'm kind of stalling because shit's about to get real here pretty quick and I'm not really looking forward to it, so let's get to stalling. So, okay, what's this book actually about? Giant Days revolves around 3 women as they enter the University of Sheffield in South Yorkshire, England. The 3 end up assigned to each other as roommates and they immediately hit it off. There's Esther de Groot, the tall, skinny goth who often finds herself in the center of complicated relationships and lots of drama. She's a returning character from Allison's Scary Go Round web series and whom the series was really based around before being published by Boom Studios. The second roommate is Susan Ptolemy, who is definitely the most level-headed and stern of the 3. She's a medical student who acts tougher than she is and acts as the group's grounding force. Despite that, however, she also seems to find herself in all kinds of weirdly dramatic events. The third of the trifecta is Daisy Wooten, who is the most innocent of the trio, having been homeschooled by her grandmother after her parents died in a plane crash. More than anyone else, Daisy struggles the most with discovering her identity as she's thrust into this new position of independence, made even more complicated when she starts questioning her sexuality. She actually has a really sweet plotline involving her coming out to her grandmother that's a bit of a tearjerker. Together, they'll form an unbreakable bond of friendship, which they'll use to traverse the harsh, uncharted lands of college life. Along their journey, they'll be joined by their fellow students and neighbors, Graham McGraw and Ed Gemmell. Graham is a genius-level woodcrafter and engineer who's obsessed with building with his own hands. He was also a childhood friend of Susan who had a bit of a crush on him, but he rejected her advances and ended up dating someone else. Susan hasn't quite forgiven him for that at the time the story starts. So naturally, they end up together before long, and a large part of Susan's story is managing the ups and downs that come with managing a long-term relationship, especially through college. Ed, on the other hand, is a longtime friend of Esther's, and has had a bit of a crush on her that, for majority of the series at least, has had no chance of being returned. Unlike Susan, however, who ends up getting the person of her affection, Ed isn't so lucky, and he has to grapple with the difficult task of moving on, while keeping the friendship. Now, to be clear, while the series does tell the story primarily through the perspective of 3 young college women, which is no small thing, the basic concept and plot elements of Giant Days aren't necessarily new by any stretch of the imagination. We've certainly seen these same ideas played out time and time again over various mediums. But there's something to be said about a series that attempts to modernize the traditional tropes, and that's exactly what Giant Days does. While everyone definitely talks in a very quirky comedic way, everyone still feels very much like they live in this realistic but also kinda kooky world, and they all work together to support each other through it. And that's important. At least, it's important to me. Because one thing that always bothered me about similar stories is that no one really knows how to sit down and sort their shit out. No one seemed to grasp the concept that it's possible to talk things through without screaming and fighting. Because in most other stories like this, the people who make them don't see that as interesting enough drama. Like, everyone acting like maniacs was somehow more interesting than people just actually talking. But Giant Days doesn't do that. It doesn't fall into traditional drama traps. That's not to say that fights don't happen and people don't yell at each other from time to time, but they also don't stay mad at each other. They sit down, they try to understand the other's perspective, and they end up growing closer together as a result. And that's refreshing. And in this day and age, I think it's necessary to start telling stories that way. To promote that as a way people should actually try to communicate with each other. Because life is short and difficult, and it's difficult enough without having to go through it alone. We are naturally social creatures. Maybe not all in the same way, but we're meant to talk and be with other people. But we get so wrapped up in the perceptions of how these relationships are supposed to play out that we forget just how to really help each other sometimes. We forget how to help each other grow because so much of it requires that we open ourselves up to being vulnerable. And that's fucking hard. It's hard opening ourselves up and allowing others to see all the weird and the dark and the sad that lurks in our tiny little frames. But it shouldn't be, and it doesn't have to be. I believe that as we get older, we are allowed to choose our family. Not necessarily a family you're born into, although that's important too, but the family you create. Through friends, through relationships, through joys and pains, through triumphs and failures. The family you choose can mean everything. Or at least, the family I chose means everything to me. And I think one of my biggest regrets I have is wasting so many years on the wrong choices. On choosing people who were not good for me. People who took advantage of me. People that treated me as inferior. People who call me worthless. And every now and again, I think back on that time and just feel how much it still hurts. And how angry and ashamed I am, not just about the people I had in my life at the time, but also that I put up with it for so damn long. And I think that's what speaks to me so much about Giant Days. It's a story about the family you choose. It's a story about people who never treat each other with disrespect, who never have to fear rejection from one another. They support each other in their growth. They encourage each other to step outside their comfort zone. They know when to comfort and when to call out. It's a story about people who want to be in each other's lives and they want to do it right. So when they're happy, they're joyous and weird, and they give each other the freedom to revel in that weirdness. No one's judged. No one's rejected. They're just loved for who they are. When something good happens to one of them, they're all happy for them. When something bad happens, they help them grieve or help them plot revenge. And when problems come up, they talk about it. They get through it. They don't hold it against each other, at least not for very long. They talk about their feelings. They make an effort to listen and understand. Even when relationships don't work out or they have to watch one of them make a mistake they can't do anything to stop, they always come back together in the end. Because they're family. And family doesn't give up on one another. Whether it's a friend who dates someone you know is bad for them, but you give them the freedom to learn that for themselves, or it's learning to stay friends with someone you had a crush on because you want to keep them in your life. Or supporting each other through the transition from living together to moving apart. They will never lose the connection they've shared. They'll pick each other up when they're down, and they'll call each other out when they're doing something stupid. And I just think, now, when I look back at what I went through, and how small I always felt, and still feel sometimes, it hurts like hell. And I'm not saying my life is any better or worse than anyone else's. I know there are people that have had it way worse than me, but this defined my world for so long. And while rejecting that initial chosen family was one of the hardest and best decisions I ever made, there are still a lot of scars. But when I look at where I'm at now, I am so grateful for the family I got to choose later in life. Because while the family I had was abusive and the worst for me, the family I created in their absence made me who I am now. And I am forever in their debt for that. Because for the first time, I felt like I could really be me, and I never had that before. I always felt like I had to fit in some kind of mold. I felt I had to change myself to be accepted. So to have friends who never asked me to do that, who accepted me as I am, to allow me the opportunity to be vulnerable and to feel, and to be vulnerable with me, goes beyond what words can adequately express. This is my family. This is the family I chose. The ones who have chosen to join me in this weird, wild experiment of mine. Who have shared laughs with me. Who have joined me in joy and pain. Who have been there through depression, loneliness, and heartache. And And while I don't always talk to all of them or stay in touch as much as I'd like because I'm really bad at staying in touch, they're never far from my heart. And I think that's why Giant Days has connected to me so much. It reminds me that the people who are the biggest contributors in who I've become, the person I'm proud to be, who I've worked really hard to be, are never really that far away from me. It reminds me to cherish everything and everyone that led me here. Because life isn't easy, but it doesn't have to be bad. Because you always have a choice. A choice of where and whom to invest your time into. And if you choose wisely, you can find the people who will help you, the people who will push you, the people who will grow you, the family that can help every small day feel gigantic.